Hi there, this is Adam,
And James.
and we're on Think Me. I'm about to cry. We've been just having a devil of a time getting our system running today.
Just a
That's
real
not a,
bugger of a time.
just a bugger. It sure is nice to have you here today, and we hope that you comment on our video with your insightful comments that we respond to in our Talking Integral Comments Answered videos. Integral theory is kind of a medium-sized topic. I wouldn't say it's huge. I'd say it's something you could get the basics of in an afternoon, perhaps, and still have quite a bit of work to do. 5 modules total. We got aquila latus, quadrants, levels, lines, types, and states. Levels is the real big one here. This chart here is our levels that we're using. Altitudes. The metaphor of altitudes is visible light spectrum. It's visible light spectrum. The rainbow pertains to the mind, the level of mind. So whenever you have a mind in here experiencing a world out there or a social community, pretty much in every case where there is reality, you will have something conscious interacting with something objective. This is a level of mind. This is captured in our rainbow. But in the same analogy, the spectrum expands beyond that which is visible, outside of the level of mind, to levels that are sub-mind and possibly levels that are beyond mind. So in our levels, how do they actually work video? We talked a lot about the way these levels conjugate, the kind of currency they use to come to be, what the green stage considers itself to be, what it's generally working with. And each of these stages kind of has their own operating system in that sense. Going beyond that, it's a completely different ball game, which is why in the analogy we have these entirely different bands of the spectrum. We have radio, microwave, infrared, visible, ultraviolet, and then we can get up there into our X-rays, gamma rays, what I could
hmm
call cosmic rays. This is unknown to us because we are level of mind and we can't see past where we're at. But we can intuit what's beneath us quite a bit. This is sort of what we've been up to as scientists. Thus, we may return to the beginning of time. Time begins when you say it begins, when you're experiencing time and you
When
go,
we start to measure.
oh, like something happened earlier. Now there's time. That's kind of how it works. It didn't. Nobody pressed play at a certain point, and nor is time really meaningful before there's creatures experiencing it. So it's sort of this abstraction at the beginning of time. In the beginning, there's really none at all, and then something that's called Yahweh in this context says, "Let there be light." And this to us basically means let there be levels. There's no levels yet. There's nothing. So we're going to make levels of light. And integral theory deals with the known. We deal with categorizing things that humanity knows or that I might know provisionally to be possibly true. Just, if somebody tells me something, it enters my mind. I have to categorize it somewhere. We're going to put it at a level, probably, or just approve or dismiss whatever your operating system does. We're going to deal with information in that way at a level. This is kind of a fun thing about integral, in that it kind of can look like a cult or a religion. You'll hear those words bandied about quite a bit.
Mm.
What's interesting is it's sort of the opposite of that because we don't assign names or agencies to unknown things. So it's a philosophy of light. It's a philosophy of the known. We're milling over things that are fairly agreeable. We're not posing all this theory of new stuff, exciting new novel things that don't actually exist in real life, because that's not really what we're faced with. We're faced with reality. Reality is often simple, crude, mundane. So we're just trying to put it into categories. Surprisingly, we arrive at pretty amazing and deep insights using simply that approach. So integral is considered by itself a theory of everything, in existence, internal, external, pretty much anything you could talk about fits somewhere into this model of reality. The human eye only perceives light. All we're doing is taking in information and choosing between it. There isn't really anything like negative or anti. Like we don't interact, to our knowledge, with like antimatter or anything invisible. We can deal entirely with the known. The concept of a theory of everything, it's a physics concept. Something in physics will give us the cornerstone of what reality is. We're starting in the objective physical reality and we're trying to figure out, what is all this stuff? Classically, we've had this presumption that if I'm a car and I just dissect myself, I take myself apart, I find out I'm made of all these Legos. Well, so now the fundamental unit of me is a Lego. And I say, what is a Lego made of? It's made of plastics. And I look into how plastics are made. So in the human, we had our minds blown when we got to the germ theory of diseases, because we developed these tools that allowed us to see the very tiny. We looked into microscopes and we saw that we aren't just a substance. We're not just like skin substance. That is made up of little tiny things called cells. And that was a breakthrough in medicine and our understanding of reality, to get to a level beneath that which we can see, which is smaller than the eye can see, which is smaller than we can really comprehend without using special tools and theories. But of course, cells are a rather large level in the grand scheme of things. We got even better microscopes, and we saw that these cells are themselves composed of little organelles and pieces and bits that their cells are made of. They're different one to one. They're almost like their own little life forms. Those are made up of molecules. We discovered the realm of substance. We were able to do chemistry and make polymers and yoga pants and things like that. And then we go, we don't really see beneath this level, because we're kind of at the level at which sight occurs, where like the interaction of your eye would actually be relevant with light. So getting into the level of matter, molecules are made of atoms, which are made of all assembly line, a conveyor of different concepts, subatomic particles, subatomic particles, going on into possible 11th dimensional superstrings that are their vibrations on these tiny infolded dimensions create the reality we experience. This is actual science.
Is that where
this
quarks
isn't mysticism I'm talking. Quarks, yeah. This is the very smallest thing that we're even capable of conceptualizing, it would seem. And here is this is the end of light. This is the level at which light is occurring, like photons. It doesn't really get smaller than that. It seems to be the case that reality can't make a unit smaller than a photon, or like a unit of light. It's almost like the singular unit. So this is an approach of looking in and down to the smallest things and saying the components of reality build reality, so what's the smallest component? No matter how far we go, we keep finding with more complicated rules, which teach us things about nature that we can use, but nevertheless, it doesn't help us much philosophically. There's not a huge difference in the human experience between knowing what cells are and knowing what electrons are, and then knowing what quarks are. I mean, sure, there's a difference, and especially in technology, but philosophically, that doesn't really make a huge difference, because it's so beneath the level of human concern that it's almost like a triviality. So then you can start to ask, all right, physicists are trying to get the nature of the universe by understanding how gravity works, how light works, how these mega forces work. Simultaneously looking at the very smallest components and saying, how do they work? What are they? So if we have the very largest thing and the very smallest thing, we exist in this visible spectrum here. We're not looking at it at all. We're trying to induce the visible light from these very mysterious, invisible things that tell us like how galaxies work and how black holes work and how subatomic particles work. So it's kind of weird to think of that as a theory of everything, because it's really not even factoring in consciousness, the human experience. In the scale of the universe, it's like, well, what does that matter? What is the human experience? What is life? It's a little flash in the pan. It's this little thing. Well, we don't really see it that way. The vast reaches of the galaxy are uninteresting. They don't have will. They don't know they don't see and perceive. They don't experience what's going on. In a way, we're the most interesting thing in the universe, because we do have agency. We do have mind. We have higher levels than all the other stuff apparent in the galaxy. For a theory of everything, it might be good to look at this really rare, unique thing that's going on, the mind, the heart, the soul, as opposed to the mundane space and matter that takes up the entire universe. We can find our answers in our own origins, as opposed to something that's sort of abstract and cerebral from our perspective. So this is sort of how we home in. Instead of the very large, the very small, the extremes, we kind of go right for the center. What's happening right now? How do I come to be? How is consciousness happening right now? How is reality existing? Why is time moving? From now, from here, from me, from this. So that's a different approach. And what we arrive at, instead of particles or forces, we have this idea of a holon. A holon is something that is a discrete unit. It's its own thing, but it's also part of a larger thing, a group, it's a collective, and it also has as components groups and collectives. As we've looked at atoms, and we say atoms are made of subatomic particles, which are made of quarks. So you have like a whole quark that goes into a whole subatomic particle as a part. Subatomic particle, those band together to make atoms, as their subatomic particles are now parts, and an atom is itself a whole. It has like dynamics, you can think of it as a whole thing. The atoms then bond together, chemical bonds, electrical bonds, to make the level of substance, and now whole atoms become parts of whole molecules, and this is the level of matter and substance. So far, there's really nothing in there experiencing, as far as we can tell. There's no mind, there's no, oh, maybe, but we kind of, the existence of mind here is more like ones and zeros. It's like to exist or not exist is like a mental phenomenon, the fact of information. When the Lord saith, let there be light, and time begins according to us, atoms are formed, like a lot happens in an instant, a lot happens over this really brief span of time, which starts the universe making itself. At this point in time, there is no life, of course, there's just particles, and these particles spread out to fill an unfathomable amount of space in an unfathomable amount of time from our perspective, billions of years space, but it's rather large and as I understand, still growing. The conceit of this theory of everything is that everything in reality is a holon. This is sort of hard to get into. It takes a minute to even like, well, everything's a holon, everything's a part and a whole at the same time. So that's our fundamental particle concept. You could say everything's made of atoms, but that's really only useful to a physicist. It really only has, that information really only does anything for you if you're operating at that level. But between you and me, as in our interaction, it won't make any difference if I have this like masterful understanding of electrical charge. I can like rub my feet on the ground and touch you and it'll zap you. That's about as far as that one goes for me. The analogy that integral uses a lot, I like it all right. Again, fundamental particles, theory of everything. They go to this ancient, classic fable of, how does the Earth manage to stay afloat? Well, it's on the back of a great tiger. Well, how does the tiger stay afloat? It's on the back of a great elephant. How does the elephant stay afloat? It's on the back of a great turtle. How does the turtle stay afloat? It's on the back of a great turtle. What? Another turtle? Yeah, just cut it out. It's turtles all the way down. That's where the turtles all the way down thing comes from. And so that's the turtles in question are visible light, life, substance, matter. And we haven't found a bottom. There's going to be more beneath quarks. These are the turtles in question. And the point is very, very constructive to understand physics and subatomic particles. Very important and useful and ideologically informative. However, that's the turtles holding up the world. And there was always going to be more turtles. There will always be more to explore there. We're the people on the surface of the world. That's where the action is. We can still arrive at insights at the high levels as the high levels explore and pioneer greater understanding of those lower levels. The conceit of this Holons thing is that there's nothing in reality that doesn't construct itself starting from a level of quarks to a level of subatomic particles to a level of atoms to a level of molecules, just going up to there. I am made of that. A brain is made of that. A car is made of that. So everything in reality is stacked on top of that. And so we can say that reality is a stack, that is probably the best way to conceptualize reality on a physical level, is that there's this stack of levels So holons arise in four quadrants: self, culture, and nature. They have a sort of internal and an external. They emerge as individuals, and they emerge as examples of a group. So that will be characteristic of every holon at every level. So then you ask, like, what's the interiority of an atom or a molecule? That's an almost unfathomable concept, but we can say at some point life forms start being in there. They start experiencing, they start showing stimulus response, I think is probably the first thing that we would call life or consciousness. But that had to come from somewhere, that emerged from somewhere. So whatever the somewhere, whatever that is, we don't know, nobody knows, whatever the thing is that made life start being life, that had to exist prior as a potential, at least, for it to even happen. So we can consider that the level of mind going into substance and matter. It's a little fishy, but there also isn't a competing theory for where it comes from. There's nothing to explain this. So
was that an intentional nod to life starting in the ocean? A little fishy.
Oh,
I see what you did there. I see what's going on. Gotta put the mayonnaise in there.
You put your foot. In history, from our perspective, there's this kind of great mystery. There's all these miracles that have occurred. And I'm saying miracle sort of ironically, because at every level you understand miracle to be a different thing. But certainly we don't really get how something came from nothing, how there was vast unmanifest void that said, let there be light. We don't really know. It seems to be something that just happens. The universe just does this. Okay, so then time starts, and then everything becomes molecules and substance. That sort of plays out according to the ingredients. But then what seems to me like the second miracle is that on this one planet of innumerable planets and innumerable stars, you get these things that start moving around on their own, possibly all over the place, but all we know is here, this did happen. Life happened. Life emerged. A miracle. Why did that happen? Why in the world, in a universe that just makes orbiting matter, just makes chemicals orbiting one another, why in the world would stuff start coming out and doing stuff on purpose and having life? It's not apparently baked into the formula. It doesn't really make sense. It's kind of a miracle, or an accident, or a statistical oddity. But you have to really see that, like, the ingredients for it to happen were there in the first place. Super strange. Like why? Why are the ingredients there? So then people start saying, maybe there's like a will, like my will, like a personality to the universe, and it's doing this on purpose for some reason. That's kind of anthropomorphic fallacy. It's kind of assuming that the universe would be like me instead of something just completely different and unfathomable. And then finally, the miracle of mind. You had life on this planet forever and ever and ever, super long time, millions and millions, hundreds of millions, billions. Life exists, and it doesn't think. It's not talking. It's not really self-aware. There's something quite different about the human and the mind and the social organization. So that seems kind of miraculous for that to have come out of just all these animals boning and dying. And then you have this thing, which is like the self-aware universe, like this thing that's like, okay, what am I and what are we doing here? Nobody cared, ever. All of a sudden, somebody cares. We have these sort of node points, miracles, where major level transitions occur, where the level is almost unrecognizable from the previous level. So number one is the creation of matter and substance from the Big Bang, creating planets and galaxies with nothing else in them. Everywhere, forever. And then the second one being the creation of life on planets. The third one being the creation of mind from life. So these are sort of mega levels of this spectrum beneath the visible. Once you are contemplating it, once you're self-aware of it, when you're trying to figure it out, now we're on the spectrum at the level of mind, and this is a map of how we understand. So at the level of orange, we understand it as rational phenomena, physics, the brain generates consciousness. At the level of red, we understand it as some self-glorifying legend and that of me and my ancestors and peers, things that are selfishly oriented on a story that glorifies me. That's how red understands what's going on. Other than this, there is no understanding. This is levels of understanding. In that light analogy, we can break up the spectrum into these bigger bands. So we have little bands, the colors of the rainbow. Down beneath infrared, we saw this whole progression of things, which was basically the history of life on Earth, from very, very, very simple instinctual beings to these very, very complicated instinctual beings where instinct starts taking on a mind of its own. It starts becoming human, becoming people. That's the end of instinct. That's where we're seeing infrared in our visible light spectrum here. But prior to that, there's a whole infrared range, whatever turtles and monkeys and squirrels and bacteria and fungi and plants do, the whole level of life. And we could call that microwave, we could call that deep infrared. I'm not really sure how it lines up. But at that level, you have locomotion, you have stimulus response, you may even start to develop some emotion. You know, if you look at a dog or a dolphin, maybe they have some sort of self-concept, maybe they have some sort of group concept, but nothing like what we got, very primitive. A cool thing about humanity is we save our progress. You're a Jonathan Livingston Seagull, you learn everything beyond all the other birds, and then you die. Nobody gets that information, it's gone. Us, we write it down, we tell someone, people carry that torch onward. So this is our this is our strategy that just kicks everyone else's ass. We save our progress. I can die, you guys can pick up where I left off. No other animal can do that. This is the level of mind. Whole different ballgame. A lot of mythology and a lot of the pursuit of rational orange and green academics is this kind of quest, the human quest of understanding how these miracles, apparent miracles, occurred. Why is there something instead of nothing? Why did life form? And why am I here? What are we doing? Basic philosophical questions, always unanswered, but we have levels of understanding. And so here we're at about the teal or turquoise level, and what we're saying is that reality as it presents itself to us is a stack of levels in 4 quadrants. We're a social holon, I'm a social holon. I'm made of the history of the universe, the history of light, quarks, atoms, molecules, cells, tissues, that's what I'm made of. But then after that, I'm this whole new thing, this level of mind, that if I follow the course of that from the beginning of the universe to now, it gives this is Teal, it gives a pretty strong case for me wanting to continue developing up that spectrum. This is the Teal perspective, and this is why Teal can become so driven and so attached to this spectrum, because they see this pattern, they go, oh my God, this is what we're doing. We're developing, we're integral developers, we're going up this 4-quadrant spectrum. This is a little bit of a fallacy, a little bit of a delusion of this particular level, but every level has these. To be at that level is quite an accomplishment, and that's good. But we have to get ourselves out of that. Once we see the pattern, we can start to move forward from it. Just for the purpose of the Unthink Me presentation, because I've seen Jung, of all people, has made a chart like this of density. So it's sort of a mystical concept going back. It's one of these kind of perennial concepts, the analogy of light, a spectrum of light. Radio waves, these are huge waves. They can go through buildings. They can go through substance in real life. This is matter and substance. These pertain to chemicals, physics, particles, charges, mass, gravitation. That's what we're calling the radio wave band of the spectrum of consciousness. Life and instinct, levels of life and instinct, plants, animals, fungi, life. We're calling that microwave, perhaps, microwave and infrared. Infrared getting into perhaps like mammalian or vertebrate consciousness. It's kind of, we can kind of draw that line. We could debate about that, where that line is drawn. There might be a better answer to that. And then the Homo sapiens mind creates the visible light spectrum so that now we can talk about it, think about it, conceptualize it. Now, in the analogy, there's a lot more high frequency. Beyond ultraviolet, there's a whole ultraviolet range. We can go up there into X-rays, gamma rays, what I'm calling cosmic rays. This would be things that reality can do beyond the level of mind. These are unknown. We have no idea. We seem to know somewhere up to about right here. Again, you know, the conceit of integral, if it's gone up these levels throughout history and you're here and it keeps going, there's a pretty strong suspicion that consciousness goes somewhere and that somewhere is fundamentally different. I'm deducing that from this analogy, but it seems pretty self-evident as we're creating self-aware machines, as society's developing at this like insane pace where major social revolutions take less than 100 years. It seems pretty likely that mind is going somewhere, that consciousness is evolving, and it's going to end up somewhere, unless it ends up in a cesspit or an endless cycle. That can happen, I suppose. Why it's special to show up at this visible light spectrum? Because it's like, well, what are you measuring by? By the amount of space. In terms of space, in terms of how much space we take up, how much volume we have, we're extremely densely packed in terms of levels. I mean, we're beyond life. We're in the level of mind. You can travel light years, astronomical units. You won't find anything like us. It's very special for those of us feeling like we're not very special. All human beings are incredibly special manifestations of reality. I remember trying to wrap my head around Holons and having it like, it's a kind of dubious at first. Like I can tell you that I completely, it makes a ton of sense to me now, but I remember this being like a really difficult concept, the idea of whole parts being fundamental to reality. So I start walking around and I start saying, how is that a Holon? How is my lamp a Holon? This becomes tricky because the way that our minds work is we're language beings. The things around us are nouns, or what you could call a gestalt. Like this thing this thing is the television remote. It really only has significance to me because I have a television and I understand what these characters, what these buttons mean. It isn't just a bunch of molecules and substance. It's what we would call an artifact. Mind, the level of mind, has shaped substance into something for use by mind. So this is confusing because as human beings, we walk around the world and we say, okay, everything in reality is a Holon. What about that? What about that? What about that? Everything that we interact with is an artifact. It's something that this isn't a randomly assembled bundle of rock. This is a cup that was made for me to drink beverages out of. It's a concept. It's a meme rendered into reality. But to just consider it in terms of its substance is misleading. It's not coincidental at all. This is created by mind. So this is one of the most confusing things that happens when you try to understand Holons, is that our linguistic brain converts everything into nouns. And nouns are things that are constructed by the mind for human purposes. So it makes reality a little misleading. So an artifact is when something kind of looks like a Holon, but it's been engineered by a higher level. A heap is when coincidentally things are next to each other so they look like a Holon or a group, but it just so happens that this mineral was sitting next to that mineral. It's not a complicated mineral, they just happen to be next to each other. You know, my hand is touching this cup. That's a coincidence. There's no real chemical relationship between my hand and this cup. And as a mind, I've separated them into separate gestalts, so it's very clear to me the difference between my hand and the cup. But nevertheless, the matter of the cup and the matter of my hand are continuous here. They're physically touching. Well, we don't have any problems with this because we're linguistic thinkers. That confuses us. That makes reality difficult to comprehend, because what's really the only real thing, like to center yourself in, to understand, you are in this social Holon, the human mind, experiencing self, culture, and nature from the perspective of self. Everything you see serves the level that you're at. It's a noun that you've constructed to serve the narrative of that particular level of consciousness. So that can be confusing because the only thing going on here is this social Holon. It's the interactions of the social Holon at its current level with other levels. And so the conceit that's pretty unique to Ken Wilber's integral theory is third tier. So in general, we leave the story off at second tier, Teal, maybe even green. And so I'm talking about everyone, the way everyone sees reality or development kind of goes up to like second tier. And to add these on is speculative. It's Ken Wilber's own take on it. It is to suggest that reality is itself a sort of spiritual experience that has levels that you can develop into and insights that go beyond the human mind. And so in that case, what we would anticipate seeing in tomorrow in the emergence of consciousness beyond visible light would in some way start out as or resemble what today we consider spirituality in humankind. So spirituality isn't a vestige of the past. It's actually something that we haven't even discovered yet. It's a frontier that is unknown. And we've tried to understand it through analogy and myth and legend. But in fact, rationality and sensitivity get us just as close to the answer, if not closer. And so the integral view is to try and assemble all of our legend and myth and rationality and sensitivity into some sort of grand unifying picture. What is this all doing? What is this all leading toward? Where are we all going? That's the integral developer's role. It looks like we're going towards a spiritual thing. More consciousness, less identification with the human personality and ego, more identification with simply consciousness, a meta view of the human psyche. We intuit this really naturally in green meme era. Our media stories often depict sort of transcendent characters. To transcend the self is simply to be able to do things that go outside of selfish concerns, that you just think conceptually would be better than serving my own selfish concerns. But we have this incredible bias as the individual with the self. There's this bias of self-preservation and self-glorification. That's, clearly the human condition. But we all, in the abstract, know that there are things that are more right and that would serve the ultimate good better. As you engage more and more with those sort of more cerebral, abstract, less self-oriented concepts, you will start finding yourself going up these levels. I had simplified it to, if you consider like this band, personality, this band is sort of ego, this is psyche, this is consciousness. So again, you can smush these together. So these would be like levels, an RGB schema instead of a rainbow, just breaking it down into 3 or 4. The course upward is always more awareness. It's always standing apart from a thing that you thought you were and being able to see it from a new thing that can see the thing that you formerly thought you were. The former subject becomes the object of the current subject. All right, well, so this has been some holonic theory, a very disorganized presentation, but that's pretty much, that's the concept, that's the topic. It's kind of all over the place. Pretty abstract, but we're taking the levels all the way. This is the deep lore, this is the deep integral theory. Not as actionable, and that's why we just kind of cover it in brief. This is to deal with like physics and the humanities. This is to deal with really deep features of reality, particularly physical reality. So not as dealing with work and relationships and things like that.